So last week when I sat down to play Jedi Survivor in LA, at the early preview event I was actually also lucky enough to get to interview some of the developers from Respawn, and today I wanted to go over pretty much all the stuff that I learned in that interview, as there was definitely a couple of cool little tidbits of information. Now, the two developers that I interviewed were Brandon Kelsch, who is the technical design director. He worked very heavily on stuff like the Mantis and even the lightsaber back in Jedi Fallen Order, as well as Danish Syed, who is the principal UI designer, and he worked heavily on stuff like the immersive UI, for example, the saber customization and BD1 customization and stuff like that. It was an absolutely awesome interview. These guys were both very easy to interview, so thank you both very much for the opportunity. Brendan actually mentioned as I walked in that he watches the channel, so that was pretty surreal, and if you guys are watching, then like I said, thank you very much. It was a very, very fun interview. Now, the first question that I asked was essentially like what they thought the biggest difference was between Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor. Brandon's answer was mostly linked to like the stances. Obviously that's a big difference in the combat, so he thought that was pretty much the biggest difference between the two games, whereas Danish pretty much talked about the entire scope of the game, not only just the story but the size of the maps and all that kind of thing. I actually mentioned after that pretty much Kobo itself felt like a bigger planet than all of the Jedi Fallen Order planets combined, and just for a bit of context as to how big Kobo actually is, when I said that, Brandon actually kind of laughed and said it honestly might be. Now that doesn't mean that it definitely is, so I don't want to put words in Brandon's mouth there. That is not any confirmation, but just the fact that they don't even know if that is true or false pretty much just goes to show how big Kobo actually is, even if it is technically smaller than that. The fact they don't even know how to answer that pretty much just explains how big the planet really is. I also asked whether they thought that last gen being left out was a difficult decision, because obviously that means a lot of people aren't going to be able to play the game, but both of them pretty much agreed that it wasn't a difficult decision at all. They, as a development team, wanted to make the best game that they possibly could, and to be able to do that, that means that they had to just pretty much stick to next gen and PC, because the limitations of the last gen consoles, they are just too much for a game of this scale, and the game that we're getting would definitely not be the same if it were to include PS4 and Xbox One. So I do agree that it kind of sucks that a lot of people are going to be left out, but it is definitely the best decision for the game. And even though people who don't have next gen consoles just yet, they won't be able to play, when they do eventually get a next gen console and they can play the game, they will be thanking the devs for that decision too, because the game that they play, even if it's 3 years down the line, will be a better game than the game that they would play this month on the PS4 if it actually launched on last gen consoles. So I was curious whether they would find that to be a difficult decision, but both of them pretty much said it wasn't a difficult decision at all. They want to make the best game they possibly can. Now, I briefly touched on the customization as well, because at this point I'd played probably about an hour and a half of the preview, and I already knew that the customization was absolutely wild compared to Fallen Order. Now, something cool that I actually learned was that they pretty much said the ponchos in Fallen Order, because we kind of talked about the whole poncho meme and how obviously a lot of players really weren't happy with the customization in that game. They mentioned it was actually pretty much a last minute decision to even have any customization in that game at all. I believe the first poncho they put in the game was essentially just like a single little Easter egg hidden reward type of deal, and then the artists who were working on the poncho pretty much said, we can do a bunch of different colors of these and actually put them around the planets in different locations. And so very deep into the development of Fallen Order, they actually decided, you know what, let's actually put some customization in there. So that does kind of explain why the customization in that game was so poor, because it was essentially a last minute decision. They didn't have any plans of actually doing that initially. And it's also why they've kind of gone all out on the customization in this game, because they've realized that even though the customization in that game wasn't all that great, the fans really did like the sort of taste that we got, where it wasn't good customization, but we did get some, and it left us all kind of wanting a bit more. So that was one of the first things they really wanted to expand on this game, and I thought that was a really cool little bit of information. Now, the next few questions I asked were all a little bit more edgy, and I kind of knew that I wasn't going to get a good answer, so I'll try and fire through these a little bit quicker. I actually asked about co-op, and obviously not whether it was going to be in this game, because I just never thought it would be, but I kind of asked whether they had ever actually internally considered that, and they pretty much said it had never been considered. They'd probably talked about it a bit here and there, but it was never an actual genuine consideration, because that requires a whole other level of development. They have to actually code for all the networking and all that kind of thing, and they wanted to just focus on the story. So I know back in Fallen Order, and obviously leading into this game, a lot of people have wanted co-op. I personally think it would be really cool, but at the same time it would probably come at the downfall of the single player type of content, and so I do definitely think it's the best decision to actually leave it out. I also asked about the length of the game, and as I expected, they weren't really allowed to say, and I think they just essentially didn't even know. A lot of developers don't really know how long their games actually are, because obviously everyone's experience with it can be pretty different. Some people can kind of speed run it, some people take it a bit slower. But what they did say is that even if you mainline the story of this game, it is still bigger than Fallen Order, let alone all of the side content. And what I can say from my own playtime is that the side content already just on Kobo, I genuinely think I did more side content in the 3-hour preview than I did in Fallen Order. I'm not even joking. So the main story will be essentially bigger. How much bigger, I'm not really sure, but then on top of that, there's also a hell of a lot of side content too. Something else they mentioned was that the puzzle rooms are not really as crucial anymore. There are still some that will be throughout the, what they call critical path or the golden path within the game, that you sort of have to get past it to finish the story. But there's not going to be nearly as many as there was in Fallen Order. However, there will be still a lot of puzzles. They're just now optional, essentially. So that is a very good sign. I've got some good friends of mine who really liked the game, but the puzzles they just weren't a fan of, and they kind of just got bored of the game, essentially, because you have to get past those puzzles to actually finish the game. Now that probably won't be the case at all. Like I said, there will still be some puzzles in there, but they mentioned they just want everyone to be able to pick up the game, play through it at whatever pace they want, and be able to finish the game without it being like super stressful or anything like that. So that is definitely a good sign for a lot of players out there. Now, I also asked about how many planets there were going to be, and I was immediately shut down, not only by the two devs, but by Steph sitting next to me. They pretty much all just said, we're going to just not answer that question. So I did try, guys, but I wasn't able to get an answer on that one. Something else that I asked was about whether they actually considered to make this game in Unreal Engine 5. The game is made on the Unreal Engine, but it's Unreal Engine 4, and pretty much during the lifespan of the development of this game, Unreal Engine 5 has been released. Now, they pretty much said they did slightly consider doing that, but at the end of the day, they were just too far into development, and it would have just wouldn't have been worth switching over to Unreal 5. So it's good to know that they did at least consider it, but what I'll say is that the game looks good enough anyway that it doesn't even matter to me personally. It would have been cool to be on Unreal 5, but at the end of the day, the game played and felt really, really good. So personally, I don't think it really matters what engine it plays on. Now, the last question that I asked was essentially if there was something you could change about Jedi Survivor, what would it be? And both of them actually said that they wouldn't change anything about the game. Now, obviously, that could just be PR talk. I joked when I asked the question that the good answer for them to give is to just say nothing, but they both genuinely actually talked about it and tried to, rack their brains about what they would want to change, but they both pretty much just said that all the stuff they wanted in Fallen Order that they couldn't really put in there, they've kind of put that into Survivor now, and there's really nothing that they would change about the game, which is definitely a good sign. Now, like I said, take that with a grain of salt. It could just be PR talk, but talking to these guys, they were both very genuine people, so I don't think they're just putting on their marketing hats. They are developers, they're not on the marketing team, so I don't think they just said that for the sake of it. I definitely learned a lot of cool little bits of information, so a massive thank you again to both Brandon and Danish, as well as both Steph and Charlotte for setting up the interview. It was a whole lot of fun, and hopefully you guys learned some cool bits of information from the video. If you guys are new to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications. There is more content on the way. Tomorrow, I'm actually going to be talking about my single concern for the game, so that's a pretty important video. Now, it's nothing drastic, so don't start stressing out, but I'm going to try and cover the more negative side of the game as well, so be sure to keep your eyes peeled for that. But with that being said, thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and may the force be with you always.